and welcome to this episode of the Conceive Baby Podcast. I'm your host, fertility naturopath and nutritionist, Tasha Jennings, and I love helping you improve your fertility well-being to create your healthy pregnancy through my popular online programs and private online consultations. And today I'm thrilled to welcome two extraordinary women who share an inspiring story of love, resilience, and friendship. And that's Lisa Messenger and Sarah Megginson. Lisa and Sarah share their phenomenal story in their book, The Power of Two, which tells the journey of Lisa's dream of becoming a mother and Sarah's incredible offer to help make that dream a reality by carrying her child. Lisa Messenger is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Collective Hub, a multimedia cross-platform movement to inspire and educate. Lisa has authored over 40 books, walked countless stages as an international speaker, is a passionate humanitarian, and, as we'll talk about today, is now the proud and doting mama bear to Hugo. Sarah is a seasoned lifestyle columnist, editor, and finance expert. She has shared her expertise in major publications like Cosmopolitan, Mamma Mia, and Yahoo Finance, and is on a mission to simplify finances for all. But together, they embody what it means to support, empower, and uplift one another through life's most challenging and beautiful moments. So welcome, Lisa and Sarah.
Thank you, Tasha.
Thank you so much for having us.
Great to be here.
I feel like I know you. I was, fortunate to be sent a copy of your book, and which I have to say I inhaled. It was so honest, so real, and to hear your journey through both your voices and both your perspectives, I have to say was really enlightening. So we'll start with you, Lisa. Now, you have been through an incredible journey to get to this point: miscarriage, attempted adoption, IVF, sperm donor, trying naturally, IVF with your own eggs, IVF with donor eggs. In fact, a total of 18 rounds of IVF. Now, I know a lot of listeners will resonate to many of those steps. Can you share a little more about that journey?
No, I think you've encapsulated it perfectly. End of story. There's 8 years on pleasure. If only it were that easy. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was a lot, and I've largely, as many listeners may have chosen to do, I can kind of desensitize myself from a little bit and compartmentalize it because it was harrowing. So yeah, essentially it was an 8-year journey, and that's partially why Sarah and I decided to write the book, was just to help other people, because when we unpacked it all and the amount of people who'd come up to us in the streets and things, just knowing a tiny smidgen of it, we were like, okay, let's just pour it all out. But here is the Cliff Note version. 2015, actually, I'm going to go back one step further. 2001, I started my own business, and I fell in love with business. And I think a lot of people can relate to this. As a founder and an entrepreneur, I was just so passionate every day. So I almost forgot to have children. And I think that's probably kind of an important point to put in here, knowing what I know now. I kind of just kept thinking, oh yeah, haven't met the right guy, I'll do that later, I'll do that when. And so by 2015, I had met the one, who turned out to not be the one, but we did fall pregnant naturally together, and sadly that pregnancy was not to be. I had a miscarriage, and shortly after, our relationship ended. And the following year, 2000 and actually it was the end of 2015, I think, I was like, right, I'm going to go to Bali, and on my birthday, which is the 29th of December, I want to do anything to take the focus off me. And I ended up going to the Jodi O'Shea orphanage in Bali, and I just unexpectedly fell in love with this baby Gracie, who I ended up lying next to for the best part of 3 days. And after that, I was like, right, I can do this. This motherhood gene has really been ignited in me. And so I spent maybe the next 6 months or so trying to go through the red tape and the bureaucracy and everything else to try and adopt that baby. And that was not meant to be. So 2016, I was like, right, I'm single, but I sure as hell want a baby now. So I found out the process involved with getting a sperm donor baby daddy and IVF. And I courageously, I think, in hindsight, went through the journey of choosing a baby daddy. And then I went through the protocols of injecting myself and all of that kind of thing, and did 2 rounds with donor sperm, neither of which were successful in a pregnancy at all. And then the following year, I met Stephen, my now partner of nearly 8 years, and on our second date, he said, "Oh, by the way, do you want to have kids?" And I was like, "Huh, interesting. Do I what?" And so that's an interesting thing, right, with a new partner to bring up. Well, actually, I got pregnant and I've had sperm donor and the IVF, and I tried to adopt. But yeah, here we are, second date. Let's go. So that was interesting. And of course, I wanted to make sure he wanted to make sure that we were right. So it was sort of 6 months actually, which we didn't talk about really in the book, 6 months of kind of contraception and condoms. And that felt really at odds with me for someone by then who wanted a baby so desperately. But it was also like, okay, let's be responsible here and, slap a condom on because I don't really know you that well, and let's make some, proper informed choices. And once we kind of got to a period, which is probably about the 8-month mark of kind of going, yeah, we want to be together, we tried naturally. And I know this is kind of a long story, but it's actually a short story if you live it. But then I was like, okay, let's try naturally. Okay, I'm excited because, his mindset, I'd already been through 3 different stages, but he was at stage 1. So he was like, no, of course, we need to get pregnant naturally. So I was like, okay, well, let's try this. And so we tried for quite a long time, which for anyone who's been trying is quite arduous because there's only 3 days a month or whatever you can get pregnant, and it becomes very like, okay, quick, get on me and let's go.
Very mission driven. Yes. Yeah.
Mission driven. And sometimes that takes a little bit of the sexiness and spontaneity out of it. And then after trying for quite a long time naturally, we did some, and I won't go into the protocols because they're different for everyone, but we did something, before actual IVF and egg collection and trying to, induce my own hormones and things. But again, that's very much like, here's a phone call from the clinic. Right, go. You're ovulating it. Oh, quick, get home from work. Boom, boom, let's go. So very kind of arduous. And then we got to a point where I think he was finally open to, okay, this isn't working. I'm not getting any younger. He's substantially younger than me. And yeah, let's try IVF. So we then proceeded with a further 14 rounds of IVF and doing lots and lots of different natural protocols, you name it. I've tried it, I think it would be fair to say by now. And then enter Sarah, which we can go into in greater detail.
Absolutely. And you skim over 14 rounds of IVF, but anyone listening knows that that is massive. And look, as I mentioned up front, you are hugely successful and you continue to run multiple business and show up for your community. But you mentioned in your book, and you mentioned just then that on the inside, you were often living a private hell. And you were juggling IVF medications on a demanding travel schedule, which anyone who's traveled doing IVF knows is really difficult. And when you're about to go on stage at a big event is when your miscarriage happened. Can you tell me how you juggle those massive, I guess, huge things with people watching and the huge pressure that comes with that, with the journey that you were living privately?
Yeah, thank you. And then Sarah, I promise I won't hog the whole podcast. We'll get to
No,
you. But
I'll move on to Sarah soon.
But I think, Tasha, it is really good to contextualize the reality of it, because 2 things I'll say up front. One is, I feel like looking back, we were in a very fortunate position that financially we were able to keep going with so many rounds of IVF and so many other protocols. I mean, I know a lot of listeners, a lot of people aren't in that situation. And part of what Sarah and my hope is that, the government comes to the party a bit more with supporting some of the IVF and indeed other parts of the process, because I think infertility of some form affects so many people now. So I think it's really important that, the powers that be start to support that. And to your next part, yes, the jumping on and off stages is a large part of my living, and I get paid very, very well for it. I'm in a fortunate position that I've had my businesses 23 years. So to get on stage in front of an audience for an hour, I generally get paid between $10,000 and $12,000. In the US, I get paid $30,000. Now, coincidentally, a round of IVF in Australia is about $10,000 to $12,000 in my experience. And so some people would say, well, of course, you stupid thing, you can't get pregnant. You're, on enough flights and all around the world. But of course, you stupid thing, how do you think we afforded to pay for so many rounds? So there's a bit of a duality around that, because yes, it was very isolating and lonely. And I was jumping on and off stages and writing books about positive psychology and living your best life. And underneath, and I am an open book on most subjects, but I think because I didn't have the answers, and I am the ultimate problem solver, but I just couldn't solve this problem. And so I kept it to myself for the longest time and lived in a very dark, isolated, lonely space behind the scenes. And I literally was sometimes, that miscarriage, actually, as you said, was I had to go and do a speaking gig, started bleeding. I was away with a girlfriend who'd come to see me at that gig, but I didn't even tell her. And I just remember going into my bathroom in the bedroom and bleeding and being like, oh my God, what do I do? And it was just horrible and really lonely and isolating. And I look back and I talk about it in the book, like, why do we, as women in particular, keep these things to ourselves? And, I know since I've started sharing my journey, how many people have come out of the woodwork and they're like, oh my God, me too. Or thank you so much for helping. Or thank you for being honest about all of that. Yeah. And the on and off stage thing was wild. One time I over injected myself and was like so high, I got transported off in an ambulance. And other times, because the protocols were choose your times, but 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. or 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. And so you choose that. But that doesn't always work around a busy schedule. So sometimes I'd be like inhaling medication before I jumped on stage, or like behind the lectern, or I'd be coming off stage and like injecting myself in a public bathroom. Like, it was wild. It was really wild, all of it.
It is such a wild journey. And thank you, Sarah, obviously, for helping Lisa on this journey. And you said in your book, Sarah, that you were actually a little surprised when she said she had been doing IVF for a year, because Lisa was doing wonderful things with her magazine, her books were flying off the shelves, and you assumed she was in full flight career mode. So can, Sarah, you talk a little bit to that, I guess, really pivotal conversation where she did then share more about her struggles that were not as noticeable on the surface?
Yeah, I was really surprised because Lisa was such an open book with everything. So normally, through her Instagram and through her Collective Hub community and stuff, she was always really open and often would share things as they're happening. So like, as, the magazine was building and there might've been growing pains, she would be sharing that like almost live and kind of writing books about it in the moment. And I was Lisa's book editor for a number of years. So we had that quite close relationship where she would, I'd be talking to her about the book project we're working on, and she would be saying, oh my God, this has turned to shit and we need to figure this out and da-da-da. So she had always been really kind of open, not just with me, but with everyone. She is a real open book with a lot of her life. So when we had the lunch where I offered to be her surrogate, I didn't even know she wanted to be a mum. It had never come up in conversation. It had never been part of anything really that she'd talked about. So I knew that she'd gone to the orphanage. She'd shared a little bit about that on social media about how lovely it was, but I kind of just assumed that was a moment and not a movement, I guess. It was just like a moment where she was, had this connection with the child. But a lot of people have children in their lives and have connection with children without being parents. And I just kind of assumed that's where Lisa was going. She was, kicking massive goals in her career and had never talked about motherhood. So when we were having lunch and it came up and she said, I've actually been doing IVF. I've had a few rounds. I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And she goes, I know, I've been keeping it quite private. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. And she kind of said, oh yeah, it's not so incredible. It's not going very well. And I didn't even think about it. I just said, oh, well, I'll be a surrogate if you need one. It was just kind of a cheeky half offer. Like it wasn't a real offer in the
Mm.
respect that I hadn't thought about it. I just was like, oh, well, I can help with that. I had just before that, not too long before that, I'd had a miscarriage. And I had three kids of my own, but then I had a miscarriage, and that like plummeted me into a grief spiral. And I really connected, I think, into that that grief and loss that women have when they either get pregnant and can't hold it, or when they can't get pregnant at all. It really cracked me open to that. And I think in that moment when she was sitting in front of me going, oh, it's not going very well. She was only a year maybe into it, a year or two. I think you just started dating Steven. So you're only like a year or two into it. I just went, oh, well, I can help. Kind of cheeky, half casual offer. And we kind of just had like a jokey conversation. She's like, oh my God, amazing. I don't think I'm there yet, but wow. And then we just didn't talk about it again for a number of years, but we didn't realize that seed has been planted. And I remember that trip. I came back to the Gold Coast because I lived on the Gold Coast, Lisa's in Sydney. And I came back to the Gold Coast and said to my husband, oh, by the way, I offered Lisa to be a surrogate. Ha ha ha. And he was like, oh yeah, sounds great. Like he's used to me kind of, we're always doing silly things. And he was kind of, and I had always been interested in surrogacy too for many, many years, because I have a really easy fertility journey. It's just always something that's really fascinated me, the different pathways to creating a family. So I kind of told him, and he's like, oh, seriously? And I was like, oh no, probably not. Like, but just letting you know, I threw it out there. And then we didn't talk about it again for like years. So it was just like a seed planted and kind of forgotten.
And look, as you said, Lisa, I think in the book, you said you weren't really ready then. It was you're on this different path. And I love your quote that you said, sometimes the unthinkable becomes thinkable. So can you tell us a little bit about reaching that decision and that shift in your mindset?
Yeah, and thank you, Tasha. I think it's a really important point for the listeners because, it's not like I just woke up and went, oh, I think I have a baby and I think I'll have a surrogate. It's not that easy legally or logistically. But also, I really think we arrive at different things in our life, whether that be trying to have a baby or business stuff or a myriad of other things. And for me, I think, and for many of us, we start out thinking, of course I'll carry my own baby. Of course I'll use my own eggs. Of course, of course, of course. And then, different circumstances, be they external factors, i.e. not having a partner, or internal factors, eggs, whatever, not functioning, come into play. But for me, I had to experience all of the pieces before I was ready to open the next door. And I think that's also important because I've been writing and speaking about mindset for so many years. I think part of what keeps us going, because many people have said to me since, oh my gosh, how did you keep going? And I think how you keep going is you keep unlocking little doors and little glimmers of hope and little paths not yet tried. And so I had to go through, trying lots of things and being determined to achieve whatever it was that I was trying at the time until I was completely bereft and, burnt out and exhausted and just almost given up. And so that's when in 2022, so 4 years after Sarah had originally done the offer, I was like, well, it was a funny story which we talk about in the book, but I seemed to jump into crisis mode. I'm very good at helping other people solve problems, even though I couldn't solve that problem myself. And I was helping set up evacuation centres and all sorts of other things on the northern rivers during the floods. And Sarah's hubby, Christo, who is an absolute saint and the most amazing human, he had interviewed me on the radio. He's a radio DJ on the Gold Coast, and I didn't put two and two together. I'd actually never met him, despite Sarah and I being close. And Sarah texted me after and said, hey, just heard you on the radio with my hubby. By the way, how's the IVF going? And yeah, it just happened over a text message. And I think my readiness then was circumstantial in terms of I was surrounded by real crisis, like people, we were rescuing in boats and with helicopters and pulling cats out of roofs and setting up mattresses in evacuation centers. Like it was kind of this real crisis. So I think my senses were heightened. And also I was probably in a really vulnerable state. So when Sarah said on text, how's the IVF going? I just pinged back literally in the moment, probably not even thinking about it too much, but in kind of desperation then, I was like, ugh, not great, still want to be a surrogate. And Sarah was like, I remember I was like in the middle of this disaster zone, quite literally, and Sarah being like, yeah, still interested, got to check a few medical things, let's circle back. And I was like, great, give me a few days, I'm like literally in this. And she had to do her thing. And it was, I don't know, it was just like, I think from the moment she offered, it just felt real and it felt right, and we felt connected, and it's been the same way and the same feeling ever since that day. Now I'm going to get emotional, but it's like literally, Sarah has never, not once, let me down or not done something, since the day she said that, to getting pregnant and the implantation, to through the pregnancy. And Hugo's getting choked up 16 months now, and ever since. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because there's a lot of people that make a lot of promises in this world, and I'll be there for whatever you need, and then when you do need, suddenly they're not there, or oh, that sounded fun, but now it's just a bit tricky. And like, there's never any of that. Everything with Sarah comes just from such a, yeah, let's do this. Like, I probably trust her more than almost any human on the planet now, just like real communication. And yeah.
Well, you have been through a lot together. And Sarah, sometimes you do throw out these flippant comments that may just be that. So deciding to be a surrogate, look, it is such a profound act of generosity. I guess, can you walk us through what went into making that decision? I guess holding it, as Lisa said, you threw that out there and you stuck with it. Can you tell us about that thought process?
Well, I guess, as Lisa said, getting to the point of accepting a surrogate in her journey was a long journey for her in a number of steps. I would say the same happened on my side, but more in the respect that I had kids and a husband. So it wasn't just me making the decision. Yeah. So there was so much that went into it. Like I also had with my pregnancies, I got hernias. So I'd had a pretty major abdominal surgery to stitch my abdominal muscles back together and have mesh inserted. And my surgeon, when I did that, he said, you do this once you've finished having babies. And so one of my first calls after speaking to my husband was to him to say, hey, if I was to get pregnant again, what would happen? And he said, I thought you were done with babies. And I said, yeah, I am, but I want to have a baby for my friend. And he said, look, he'd been doing it for like decades. And he said, look, I've not had this happen before. Let me go do some research and come back. So he came back a week later and he said, it's going to be okay. You might have complications. You might get another hernia. You might need surgery again. And you cannot have twins. He's like, if you have twins, you will cause a lot of damage in there. But if you just have one and just pray it's a really small baby, it should be manageable. So I went back to Lisa and Stephen. I was like, okay, the surgeon's given the all clear on the proviso that, if everything turns to crap, you're going to cover my surgery to repair me again afterwards. And the really fascinating thing with that was Lisa and Stephen, of course, said, of course, like whatever we need to do. But when I spoke to our surrogacy lawyer and said that to her, I said, like, obviously in Australia, surrogacy is altruistic. No money can change hands. And I said, the only, thing that I'm concerned about is that after the baby, if I need recovery, like if I need to be stitched back together, basically, I just want that paid for. Like, I don't want anything else. I just want that covered. And she said, oh, that might be considered a benefit. And I said, how is it a benefit? They're just returning me to factory seconds. Like, I'm not getting a boob job out of this. I'm just like trying to put my Humpty Dumpty back together again. And she's like, oh, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Fortunately, we never had to get to it. And despite Hugo being a big baby, he didn't burst anything and everything was fine in my stomach. So we never got to that point, but it highlights just how clunky and, there's so many little landmines along the way. There's so much to navigate. So it's a pretty intense thing to go through. And I had to make sure that my kids were on board, that my husband was on board, that everyone was kind of up for this adventure. And that's how we explained it to the kids. It was like, this adventure we're going on, we're going to be helping our friends. I think it was a beautiful thing for them to experience and witness that the steps you can take to be of service in your community. Like that for them, I think it was a really expansive experience. But I do think it's something that anyone considering surrogacy has to consider. My kids were at an age where I was able to, they were all, in primary school and high school. So their needs were a little bit further on. I think anyone that's got like toddlers and small kids understands how physical that is. And I think taking this on then might have been a bit more challenging, but they were at a point where I could a little bit, when I was heavily pregnant and I was tired, I could just like chuck the TV on and go like, Mummy's lying down.
Yeah.
You can't do that so much when, as Lisa is discovering now, you can't do that so much when you've got a toddler. So the timing and the moons all aligned really well.
It does sound like there was a bit of an alignment with your journeys at the time. And I was going to say in my next question, like once that decision, I guess, is made to, okay, we're going to do this, it's almost the easy part. I don't want to say it is the easy part, but there's a huge process from there, and we won't get into the technical side. And if anyone wants to know more about the legalities of surrogacy in Australia, surrogacy lawyer Nicole Russell, who also conceived her child through surrogacy, joined me on a previous episode, so you can explore the legalities there. But you both talk about boundaries. And I know, Sarah, you say in your book that you're not a huge fan of the word boundaries. It's overused. It's almost lost its meaning. But the concept of boundaries that you really are all about. And Lisa, I loved your comment that boundaries for you stand as pillars of strength, self-worth, and personal empowerment, that they're not constraints, but rather declarations of self-respect and honor. So can you tell us a bit about how boundaries influenced and I guess supported your journey?
Yeah, so boundaries for me, I think I think for us, it was really about open communication. And that was the most important thing. And Sarah's actually much better at that. She is like an absolute straight shooter about everything. Whereas I'm a bit more of a people pleaser and I dance around it. And so it's been actually such a beautiful relationship as it's deepened as well, because sometimes I'll pussyfoot around something. But it's really interesting because we've had such clear, open, honest communication. There's never been anything that's been tricky. Sarah can talk a bit more about her boundaries in a moment, but they were certainly things around, well, more so David actually having things like, they always called it my pregnancy, like Lisa's pregnancy, or Sarah's. But anyway, so David would never come to any of the scans or anything, just so he, kept a little separate to that. So we both put certain boundaries in place, I think, to protect our time and our values and our families and all of that kind of thing. But it was probably more so from Sarah's perspective than mine. I was just all in. I was just like, whatever we need to do on this, I am just there. I mean, really, during this, I just could not love her enough or try and tend to her needs enough, or, cook things for her or take her and do massages or whatever we could do to, support through the pregnancy was really, really important to me. So, yeah. So your boundaries, we're just talking more about, were probably more to do with David and calling it, him not coming to scans and all that kind of thing. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. My doorbell rang and my dog went crazy, so I had to just go get her inside. Yes. My husband was amazing the whole way. I don't think I could have done it without his unwavering support. Like there was a lot of heavy lifting he had to do, like emotionally and physically, and with the kids there was a lot of time where I just wasn't available. I was at appointments and stuff, so he did heaps of heavy lifting. And early on he said, he was very supportive, but he said, I don't know how I'm going to go, because every other time you've done this, it's been a child of ours. So I don't know how I'm going to feel seeing the heartbeat or seeing a scan, and I don't know what my emotional reaction to that will be. And I don't want to do anything that detracts for you or makes it harder for you. So he said early on, I probably won't come to any scans. And I said, that's great, because the rooms are going to be very crowded anyway, because there will be me and the baby's two parents in there already. Excuse me.
And
so
sometimes there was my mum or Sarah's mum came.
Yeah.
It was like a full house.
yeah, it was very packed already. And And he suggested, which we talk about in the book, he said, why don't we call it Your Pregnancy but Lisa's Baby? And that was really helpful, because then, you know, he'd come home from work, and I'd say scan went really well today. Lisa's baby's like in the 80th percentile or whatever. Like, just using that language was really helpful, because I wasn't saying, oh, Bub's doing really well, we're at blah, blah, blah. Like, words are so important.
Yes.
And so powerful. And kids obviously hear everything. They are absorbing every moment of your life, whether you know it or not. So, you know, it was important for them too to hear that language, that constant, I guess, reinforcement of me saying, Lisa's baby's doing well. Lisa's baby's growing well. Lisa's baby hit a milestone. It just was constant reinforcement for them as well.
Yeah, language is so powerful.
I was going to say, languaging for both of us has been really powerful and quite profound, because throughout my whole pregnancy, I would say things like I always believed unwaveringly that it was my pregnancy. So I'd say to, you know, the stranger in the street, I'm 7 months pregnant. And I'd look down and be like, wow, you're really hiding that well. So everything was very much about languaging. And what's fascinating about that is how in sync our bodies both became, and emotions and things. Like, it was pretty wild what you can do. And yeah, so much so that I overcame many odds, and my left breast started producing milk, which is not meant to happen at all unless it's been induced in multiple different ways with multiple different drugs. So yeah, it was a pretty wild thing. And I think for us, it was all the time languaging, and really, yeah, I just never felt like it wasn't my pregnancy or my baby. So yeah.
That's really lovely. And I think you had done this a lot before. As you said, you'd done, I think, 16 rounds of IVF by this stage. So this was sort of number 17 when we came in with Lisa. Can you, I guess, tell us about that moment of going into another IVF cycle, that you knew this process intimately, but now you were going to the same clinic, I guess the same staff, but you had the power of two this time. Can you tell us about how that felt going in for that next round?
Yeah, I mean, so many things. Super exciting, because we, you know, built an entire ceremony around the whole thing. So Sarah and I and Stephen stayed at the Ovalo Hotel in Sydney the night before. We had like a beautiful dinner. Stephen wanted everything perfect for us, so he took us to the grounds of Alexandria, which had like an Alice in Wonderland theme, and like all of these pieces, right, that led up to it. Because ultimately the implantation is like, you know, 2 or 3 minutes. So we had like a whole fun sort of build up to it all. So that was like just kind of giggly and heady and exciting, because it was Sarah's like first time doing this, and my first time like having a best girlfriend by my side. And you know, while Stephen had been there for most of the other rounds, I don't know, there's just something about having a girlfriend who's like in it for the first time. So it was like kind of a beginner's mind in many regards. And you know, and I just remember Sarah drinking so much water, and then we had to wait. She's like, oh my God, I really need to pee. And then we went to do the implantation, and the nurse went to put the, you know, this what is it, spectrum in, and was like, you still have your underpants on. Like kind of excited and fun and memorable, extraordinary moments. And also, I think, and again, I try not to weigh too heavily on the downsides, but I think the clinic, knowing that it was Sarah's first time of ever going through IVF, could have explained in a lot more detail, because essentially we're paying the same fee, if not more, this time. And so I think that's really important, a message to, you know, the IVF clinics and the powers that be. Explain everything like we're beginners, it's first time, and really take us through everything, because I think that was so much for me that I'd just taken for granted, like, yep, do this, you know, snuff and puff this, inject yourself this many times and take the trigger injection and off we go. But like, it was Sarah's very first time.
It's actually such a good point. Like, they didn't brief me on anything. And I won't go into details because it's a fun story in the book, but there were moments where things happened and they gave us zero notice, and like, now you have to go get that medication now. It's not a medication available at every chemist. We had to ring around and find a chemist, and I had to go on a 2-week protocol of a certain like medication that was quite like unexpected, and there was no briefing of like, so this is what we're going to do and here's the possible outcomes. It might be A, it might be B, it might be C. Just every step was, I guess because they do it every day, it's just par for the course for them. But it was a lot of it was like, oh crap, here we go, okay, quick, let's do this.
And because Sarah's body is Sarah's body and my body's my body, there are slightly different protocols for everyone. So I think people do need to read the book, because there is a sort of comical chapter about we were in LA by this time, we had to do all sorts of things, and it was kind of crazy to ensure that this baby would stick.
And very avoidable. That's the point. It's like, it's already quite a massive thing that we're doing. Let's try to just make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, we're both about clear next steps, very much so. And conversely, what's kind of fascinating is I'd been through all of that so many times, but I kind of stopped there, and I never entertained the idea of what happens once you're actually pregnant, which is sounds wild and crazy, given I wanted a baby and would go to any lengths to have one. But I just didn't let myself think beyond that. So that was like, once we became pregnant, then it was like, oh, Sarah, help. And Sarah was extraordinary, because then she's already had 3 children. So she was able to take the baton and be like, oh yeah, here we go, girlfriend. These are the next steps we do together. So it was kind of beautiful in that way. And it was the first time in so many years that it was anything but lonely and isolating. It was just, every day was just fun, and, you know, messaging on multiple channels to each other simultaneously. It was a giddy, fun time.
I love actually talking about that connection that you have. I love your quote, Lisa, that you said that on this journey to have a baby, you've been abandoned on many occasions by friends, partners, surrogates, the medical industry, and people who should, as you've said just then, should know better. And I know many people can relate to that listening, but you realize that Sarah was not going anywhere. You feel it together, you're more resilient. I guess, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, so many things. I feel like, and people will be able to relate to this. And again, it's as much about external factors and then how we process and respond to things that are not within our control. But I do feel over years and years and years, I did feel a sense of abandonment. And that could be anything from, you know, previous partner and relationship breakdowns to, you know, telling friends, that a couple of friends, you know, very personal things about going through a, you know, sperm donor, and them kind of going, oh wow, who are you going to choose, like making it light of it, which there's a time and a place, but also sometimes it's like, be there. To, you know, older family members really not understanding, oh well, you're too old to have a baby anyway, you know, so there's that stuff. Other family members saying, oh, don't be silly, you've already got a family. Like, there was just a lot, I think. The cynical side in me, and I don't allow myself to go into this headspace that I'm currently in too often. But the cynical side of me would be around the industry, and like, how much is it a paycheck when it's like, oh well, that didn't work, which is heartbreaking for us. But is it like, oh, cha-ching, well, we got them for another round, they just signed up again. So I feel like, you know, and not pointing fingers at anyone specific, but also there are a lot of natural protocols that we tried. And there was one that I talk about in the book. I mean, I talk about a lot of the different things we tried in the book, to help people, and also point out maybe things that could be done a little better in the industry. There was one woman who promised that she could get me pregnant no matter what. And, you know, we did stool samples that were sent off to America for several $1,000s each, and all sorts of things with her. And she charged like a lawyer, and she charged $9 a minute. And 2 times that we went there, she was 4 hours late. And then we waited for the first time. She was on the golf course. And the second time we did not wait. We left. And I ain't even talking about it. But she still sent a bill for the hour at $9 a minute because we didn't wait for her. And yeah, there was just a lot of stuff like that. So I think let's step into the one. I feel like, you know, by the time Sarah came around, there was a bit of me like anything in life, it's probably any new relationship, until you have the trust and communication levels. I was a bit like, which we talk about, round 17, we got pregnant and it didn't hold. And then I was like, I went into a bit of fear and panic. Oh my God, wish you want to go again. Like, was this too much? How can I possibly ask this of her? Because I was used to being let down by so many people. And Sarah, the goddess that she is, was just like, no, what do you mean? Of course, let's go now. Like, and just, I feel like she's never given me any reason to doubt anything. And anytime I've been scared or my mindset has waned, Sarah's always been like, no, we're in this, we're doing it. Like, in so many incidences that happened that were unexpected, that we talk about in detail in the book, where Sarah was just like, yep, off we go. And so, yeah, it was pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, and I guess once you did achieve that healthy pregnancy, you mentioned, Lisa, you had a lot of guilt, that Sarah was really unwell. She was going through all these medical treatments for you. And Sarah, on the flip side, you mentioned that you didn't have the guilt, but you had this, I guess, other emotion that sort of crept in to replace it. And that was that, I guess, responsibility. And that fear, you had this gravitas really that you wanted to carry this baby and do everything you could to make it as easy as possible. I guess, can you talk to that a little bit, both of you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it wasn't like I was in fear every day, but it was just at the back of my mind, this feeling of like, please be the happy ending these people deserve. And I think anyone who's pregnant with your own baby, you have that at the back of your mind the whole time, where you're just always concerned. I'm vomiting 12 times a day, but when I only vomit 9 times, I'm like, does that mean something's wrong? And having had a miscarriage where I stopped vomiting and it actually did mean something was wrong, I was just hyper alert and aware every step of like, just let's get to our end goal here. And I really was hopeful that I would be part of their happy ending and not part of something that brings them even more heartbreak. And we had an incredible obstetrician. And once we got to about 15 weeks, Lisa and I both still had not anxiety, but we were still asking other questions. And what does this mean? And what's this risk here? And what does that mean? And he said to me, hey, see how my hair is gray? That's because I'm the one to worry about all this stuff. You guys just leave it to me. You're 15 weeks pregnant. Like, the chances of something going wrong now are so slim. So let's not think about it. And I will manage all the risks. Because there were things that popped up, like my risk of my risk of high blood pressure was high simply because it was not my genetic material. So they said, when you do IVF, your risk of high blood pressure increases. When you do IVF and it's not your genetic material, your body recognizes that and your risk of high blood pressure increases. And then high blood pressure can lead to, really serious risks like preeclampsia. So I had that type of stuff just lingering at the back of my mind. And it was, when he said that, it was really lovely because it did put my mind at ease. And I was just like, look, there's no point in worrying. Let's just focus on the fact that he's growing every week and we're, stay in the now. But when he was born, the absolute emotion I had was relief. And so many people asked me, what was it like when you gave birth and you handed him over? And I cannot describe that feeling. It was just like a full body rush of relief of, I never have to give birth again, which is amazing. But also, like, we did it. It's like running a marathon or, having a wedding or something where you've planned for this thing for so long and you've trained for it and you're ready for it. And then it finally happens and the moment happens and you're just like, it's surreal. It's like, I can't believe he's here. And he came out squealing and adorable with heaps of hair. And it was like, yes, we did it.
Yeah. And look, Lacey, you said that looking back over your journey now, which has been huge, and now holding obviously gorgeous Hugo, you mentioned in your book that if you had a magic wand, you wouldn't change anything, even though at times it wrecked you physically, tore you down emotionally, and nearly ruined you financially. So that sounds like a bit of a conundrum there, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, did I really write that? Also, just on the back of what Sarah just said, I think we will definitely give a call out where a call out is due to Dr. Drew Moffrey, who was our obstetrician at Pindara on the Gold Coast. Honestly, in terms of beautiful humans, I feel like we just got, as soon as Sarah and I got pregnant, we just had the great end of the stick, like just surrounded by beautiful humans. It must have been the universe saying, okay, you've had your shit show for 8 years. Here, have all the
I was
beautiful,
about to say that it almost feels
people.
like it made everything feel like you were on the right path, that it
Oh my
became
God,
easy from there.
he is next level and will be a friend of ours for life. Really, just a beautiful, extraordinary human who held us all the way through until the birth, when he was outside eating cheese and crackers when Hugo was actually about to be born. That's another story. But where were we? So I've lost my train of thought.
I guess when you said you wouldn't change anything, and that's a huge.
I was trying to.
Yeah.
I was trying to purposely digress.
Yeah.
No, I think people say to me, it's a funny thing. My surname is Messenger, and the amount of people who say to me, oh my God, did you change your name because you're an author? And I'm like, no, but I do feel like I grew into my name. And I also believe that I have chosen in my life to go through things, write about them or speak about them or create content around them and share the lessons learned in order to help other people. And so I think it's through that lens that I feel fortunate that I went through this, because I think it's not until you go through something, and when I say something, many, many somethings on this journey, that I now have a true understanding and empathy for so many people going through fertility journeys and or, greater things that create adversity in their lives. And so it was hell on earth for a long time. And, the beautiful gift is that we have Hugo every single day. But there are still things that we are trying to, crawl out of, like the financial situation has been pretty excruciating. But, luckily we are entrepreneurs and we know how to make money. But it's, Hugo probably cost close to $1 million all up over the years through all of the various things that we did. So we've had to, sell properties and do other things, but, we had properties to sell. So I feel in a very privileged position. And it's all learning. And I think it's hopefully now I and Sarah can help other people. And that's certainly, I think there was always going to be a book in this, because that's how we process and share, and we both do that. But I think it went to depths well beyond what we ever anticipated we would be comfortable writing about. And I think we did that because we really wanted to make a difference and really tell the whole truth about, everything in order to help other people.
Yeah, and I've heard that from other people who've had these difficult journeys, who said, this is the baby I was meant to have. And it sounds like that's exactly how you both feel, that this is the baby you were meant to have. And I guess.
Yes. And sorry, on that, yes.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot. I'm like, oh my gosh, for all of the other babies that didn't make it through all of that process, I look at Hugo and I'm like, you little smush ball. Like, now I'm emotional. He is my baby. It was always meant to be my baby, like unquestionably. It's the wildest thing how in sync him and I are. And yeah, it's just, we are so bonded. It's wild. So yes, I'd do it all again just to have Hugo, of course, because he is my baby. He is the one.
He is the one you were meant to have, even though the path was certainly not linear for either of you. And I guess to wrap up on that note, for others that are facing fertility challenges and perhaps at one or many of the stages that you have been through, Lisa, what would you both say from your unique perspectives to those who are struggling?
Well, I would definitely say be careful and mindful of who you take advice from, because there are a lot of very well-intentioned people out there, but things like, oh, just relax more, or like all of the stuff that's like that is not helpful. And actually you just want to punch someone in the head, even if you're not a violent act. And so once I did start talking about it, I put some very strong boundaries. Here we are talking about boundaries as to what was appropriate and what I was open to. And that very much for me looked like, if you have tried that yourself or watched that path yourself or had some success on that path yourself. I wasn't really open because as soon as I shared it, I had hundreds of DMs on Instagram by well-meaning people. Oh, but my friend did this, and oh, but have you tried this? It's not helpful because by that point, because I hadn't shared anything, thank you very much, yes. And I probably have tried that 70 times already. So I became very and I think that's a good lesson actually. I became, if I ever posted something after that, I would say, I am open to this if you have had specific experience. Otherwise, thank you. But, I just don't need any more because it becomes noise. And it becomes very confusing and it becomes overwhelming and it becomes like, yes, I've tried that, you stupid person, just shut the fuck up. My emotions are coming out because you kind of, it does, everything weighs on you emotionally and physically and financially. And so a lot of that well-intentioned advice, unless it's from personal experience, isn't actually that helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a message that a lot of people can resonate who are listening and in that fertility journey, and definitely wanting to punch someone in the face when they offer that advice you may have already tried a million times over.
Yes.
I love that you have written this book that I think so many people will benefit from. What would you like people to take away from the power of two?
Well, I just want to double back to your last question when Lisa was saying that, because it's a really fine line to run between. But I also think you do need to be open and share this stuff, because what Lisa did was hold it in and it became a really lonely and isolating experience.
Yes.
And if she hadn't shared with me, Hugo wouldn't be here. If she hadn't said over lunch, I'm doing IVF, like we never would have had that discussion. So I completely agree with that concept of like when everything comes at you, you just want to tell people, shut up. But I also think you should. I think if someone says to you, have you tried relaxing more? You should say, I appreciate where you're coming from, but that's not helpful. Like we need to like push back and put those boundaries up. But more importantly, and the real theme of the book is like, what is possible when you do share, when you are vulnerable, when you do open yourself up to the possibility of what may be. For Lisa getting Hugo, there were so many of those moments of a chance conversation with someone opened up a new idea. Even, and this is a whole chapter in the book, but you looked at surrogacy overseas before you tried it here. That was from a chance conversation with a friend who had done that. If we don't talk about this stuff, we don't get the ideas. And I think it's every person has their own level of knowing their comfort and their boundaries around it. Again, boundaries are incredible. Like and yourself, if you don't want to talk about it, like put that boundary up. But sometimes these conversations are where the magic is unlocked and where a little seed could be planted over lunch that 4 years later becomes a conversation that a couple years after that becomes a little smushball toddler running around who wouldn't be here, So the power of possibility is really what our book is all about.
And yes, I feel like now we're going, and yes, and yes, and yes. I feel like as well, maybe if people are going to Sarah's point, maybe if people are going to say, maybe just say at the start, are you open to an idea? Rather than just going in with the idea.
And that's not just surrogacy and fertility. That's literally a life lesson, like anything. If someone's, complaining about their relationship or something happening at work or their business, like starting with, are you open to ideas? Because sometimes we don't want ideas. Sometimes we just want to vent and go, this is really shitty. And you just want the other person to go, oh, that sucks. You don't want them to problem solve.
You just want them to listen.
Yeah. So that's such a good idea. Have that like little boundary first to see what they're open to.
So to dovetail into the final question as well, I think in that vein, the reason the book is called The Power of Two is very much around, sometimes we are vulnerable and in a situation where we need help. Not just around fertility. And sometimes we're in a situation where we have help to offer and, in Sarah's case, a working tummy. So the reason we wrote the book is, obviously the through line is surrogacy and fertility, but it's so much more than that. And we really wanted it to be for anyone who's facing, any level of adversity or wants to understand the power of possibility or, not saying no to anything and just keeping on trying. And I think in life and in business, I've done that through business and doing things in different ways, and through crisis management and doing things in different ways, and then ultimately the ultimate outsource, having a baby in a different way. So the book, we hope, will resonate with people that are not just, you know, in the fertility trenches, but beyond that, about what is possible.
And I love that you were able to share that in your book. And I think people will resonate with that who are going through the fertility journey. I do see a lot of type A personalities who, even as you mentioned at the start, maybe forget having babies, very career driven, very motivated. Not that they forget, but it's just so much is happening in their life. And you feel like you can do everything on your own. You know, and you have done so much. You've problem solved, you've overcome so much. So for you to actually be able to be open to Sarah's offer, it just shows, comes back to the power of two, that you are more powerful and stronger together.
Thanks, Tasha.
So thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your story. I'll be sure to put links to the book on the show notes for anyone who wants to go and grab a copy right now. I highly recommend it. So thank you for joining me and sharing your story.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure.
Thank you for being such a beautiful interviewer. Hopefully, I'm sure a lot of people will get a lot out of this because of your wonderful questions.
I hope so. Thanks, ladies.